Okay, so I'd like to take this opportunity and again, welcome everyone to Psych Grand Rounds. I'm very pleased that Dr. Mantz is returning with part 2 of the Sixth Sense, how to use your body to heal your mind. COVID sort of interrupted from the first part to the second, but we are here and very pleased to have Dr. Mantz. So Dr. Mantz is a board-certified psychiatrist. He has a master's degree in herbal medicine. He and his colleague, Dr. Lee, have a private practice, Santa Barbara Integrative Psychiatry, which focuses on mind health optimization using a unique blend of nutrition, supplements, pharmacotherapy, including ketamine-assisted therapy. Dr. Mantz is dedicated to help teach the public how to strengthen both mind and brain function. So I'm very pleased. Let's take a big welcome for Dr. Michael Mantz.
Hi, I'm Dr. Michael Mantz. Thank you, Cynthia, for the wonderful introduction. I spoke here about maybe like about a year and a half or 2 years ago about your sixth sense. Scientifically, it's called interoception, which is, we have our 5 external perceptions of sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell, and that's the way we perceive the outside world. And then there's also this experience, the sixth sense is the ability to experience our internal world, how we experience our body. So intero meaning internal, ception meaning receiving. So how we receive the bodily signals and how we learn to kind of understand what our body is telling us. Essentially, this is one of the things I talked about in part 1, a little bit more about the science behind interoception, about how it has become much more profound in its capacity. It influences the way we make decisions. It has the capacity of expanding our creative problem-solving capacities, helps with empathy, which is really critical for interpersonal relationships, and also emotional intelligence, particularly being able to better regulate our emotions, which is one of the big reasons why I use it in my practice. The first thing is, of course, my CYA slide. All material provided in this presentation is provided for information or educational purposes only. Consult a physician regarding the applicability of any opinions or recommendations with respect to your symptoms or medical condition. All right. So first, I want to go for a definition on body wisdom. Basically, body wisdom, or your sixth sense, is your capacity to receive and process bodily sensations with accuracy and precision. And that's important because a lot of people who have, say, chronic anxiety, they may sense their bodies pretty well, but they're not very accurate in how they sense. And so oftentimes they can get these sort of uncomfortable sensations, and they're not sure exactly what it is, and so they avoid it, and they're not able to come up with an interpretation that's helpful. So ultimately, what you want to be able to do is be able to not only sense, but also be able to sense accurately and precisely. And by doing so, you're able to translate the information of these sensations of your body to help facilitate decision making, creative problem solving, improve empathy and social relationships, and lastly, emotional regulation. And so I felt like this picture kind of emphasizes the notion of body wisdom, having both strength, balance, and flexibility, because essentially that's what you need when you're doing these sort of body wisdom practices, because most of us are not very comfortable being within our own bodies. And we're going to go a little bit more into that, but by being able to have the courage, the strength to be able to face some of these uncomfortable sensations, and that allows the body to then to fall back into balance and opens up your ability to be more flexible and more adaptive to the challenges that you face in life, which obviously there's been probably a lot more challenges in your life in the past year and a half than any other period of time. So I believe this is a calling to come back into the body's intelligence and its wisdom, because we're just being bombarded so much by verbal noise almost constantly. So this is another alternative to gain access to another type of intelligence. So I want to ask you a couple questions. These are not going to be polled. I just want you to just sort of contemplate them for yourself. And that is, if you were to stand naked in front of a mirror and look at yourself for 3 minutes, and full-length mirror, would the experience be overall positive, neutral, or negative? And so just give yourself a sense about visualizing what that would be like, and just get a sense of what that experience would be like. And the second question would be, from a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied are you with your current body? 1, it can't get any worse. 5, it's okay. And 10, damn, I'm lucky, my body's awesome and hot. So just rank yourself currently, just have a sense in how do you normally relate to your body, how satisfied you are with the current body that you're in right now. So most people in my clinical experience and even just personal experience are at war with their bodies. The most common emotions that we have towards our body are generally anger and frustration and irritation, like, oh my God, I can't believe this pain in my back. Oh, Jesus, you go into all that kind of stuff. The other one is fear. Oftentimes like, oh, what is this? I'm not sure what's going to happen. And of course, we're starting to notice this a lot more, especially now that people who had any form of kind of hypochondriasis or illness concerns or somatic concerns, along with all the fear that's been going on since sort of the COVID pandemic and the way we're handling it, the level of fear that's gone up in a lot of people is just tremendous, especially as we have isolated and fragmented ourselves from each other. So we've lost a bit of our own emotional regulation capacity, which part of that is not just what we do inside, but also our friends and loved ones who help regulate. We all help regulate our emotions. So when we're more fragmented, we lose a very powerful check. And and without that check, we often tend to kind of deviate more into more negative types of areas in our mind without the capacity, with less of capacity to be able to bring us back into balance. And then another form, the last emotion, most common, is disgust. Oftentimes you find these in people with like eating disorders is very common. But just most of us have this kind of disgust and discomfort with the body overall. And so these are the 3 primary emotions that I most see in my clients and people I just know, friends, family, towards their body. And so it's no wonder that oftentimes we're going to have a lot of issues when we have this anger, fear, and disgust being the 3 most common emotions we have towards our body. And because of these negative emotions, we often then tend to avoid our bodies. We tend to, we have this avoidance response, and we begin to mildly dissociate. And the favorite form of dissociation is to raise our attention up into our heads and to just overuse and to overuse thinking over and over again. And that way we're sort of in the land of concepts and less likely in the land of direct experience, where oftentimes the land in our head is often repetitive and doesn't give us the capacity to, and lowers our capacity for creative problem solving and decision making more effectively. So the other aspect that goes into having this sort of negative experience in our body is that we generally only pay attention to our body when things are not going well, things are not going quote unquote right. We're uncomfortable, like we pay attention to if we have a headache or we have a toothache or if our back aches, but we generally don't check in with our bodies when we're feeling fairly okay. So what that happens is that anytime we think about our body or respond to our body, there's this general attitude of distrust and a sense of unease that goes with the body. It's either it's just barely making it, it's okay, and we can kind of move our attention elsewhere, or what's wrong? Oh, come on, can this happen again? This kind of stuff. And so this negative sampling bias, again, generating this sense of unease. And then if you can imagine that feeling a sense of unease and distrust in the body over time, how year and year and year of that going on, how that unease can very easily start to slip into disease. And this is the mind-body connection aspect here, where the mind definitely influences the body and the body definitely influences the mind. One thing is that oftentimes a lot of my colleagues and other people still haven't gotten, despite 20 to 30 years of research clearly demonstrating that the mind and the body are not two separate things. They are two sides of the same coin, and they both affect each other and influence each other. It's helpful to have that distinguishment in order to be able to see where it might have started and where you might want to focus your attention. But if you have anything that's chronic, whether a chronic body condition, it's absolutely going to affect your mind. If you have a chronic issue that's affecting your mind, it's absolutely going to change the physiology of your body. So I want to invoke what we've had in the beginning of our lives before we were sort of culturally indoctrinated to dislike our bodies, to ignore them, and that is the appreciation. I mean, there is no other creation that we've discovered, like in particularly our brain, our hearts and everything, our lungs, all the wonderful facets that is this body that we all have inherited. And we now know that it's been around, that human-like bipeds been on the planet for about 4 million years. Now, we really can't conceptualize what 4 million years is like, and just to try to make it a little bit easier, just 2,000 years ago, we were at the time of Christ in that area of time, and so just take that 2,000 and multiply it by 10, and then multiply that by 10, and then multiply that by another 10. And you'll start to approximate somewhere near the amount of time that our bodies have adapted and have been sort of dancing with the environment of the earth and with other beings and creatures, and learning how to maximize that adaptation. Because if you think about your lineage and all the people that came before you, think about all the things that they've learned and all the things that they had to do and all the trials and tribulations, and that's all been built into your body. You are the product of that 4 million years of guidance, intelligence, and interaction of your body with the environment. Now, compare that with human language proper, which is where we put most of our attention to on a day-to-day basis. And human language proper developed approximately about 200,000 years ago. So this is a 3.8 million year difference between the body, in which mostly we were sensing and touching and being able to make, just sort of just sort of like fronting kind of forms of communication, until we got to language proper, which was about 3.8 million years later. And so the amount of time that these sort of non-verbal forms of intelligence have had a lot more time to be able to express themselves, to be able to kind of learn, and it's a vast amount of intelligence that most of us do not allow ourselves to gain access to. So at birth, our bodies are exquisitely sensitive and receptive. We feel things very greatly. If any of us can even remember some of our early times, how just the sounds in our environment, the things, the way it moved us, the way we were kind of like, if something were to touch our skin, we were just extremely sensitive. However, that makes us more vulnerable to a lot of the negative events that happen in our development, whether from family life or from school, but whether you were embarrassed about your body, or whether there was like people said nasty things about it, or whether the body was actually physically abused. All kinds of different events can happen because of that sensitivity. We're more vulnerable to not being able to handle the level of intensity, of negative intensity that arises in the body. So we start to sort of compartmentalize. We start to fragment, we start to dissociate, and this kind of gives us disconnects us from our body, and our body really is the interface from which we experience our world. So oftentimes this feeling of alienation, of isolation, a feeling of loneliness is in part based on this sort of fragmentation and compartmentalization that occurs to most of us to some degree throughout our early development period. And what happens is a lot of us, especially those of us who happen to be on the higher intelligence scale, we go up into our minds. Our attention comes up here, and we just get caught up as a way of sort of compartmentalizing away from all these uncomfortable experiences we may have had when we were developing, and we become what I call top-down dominant processors, where everything is very much attached to the verbal intelligence of our mind, the thinking, the concepts. So it's one step away from direct experience, and then sometimes we even get more abstract towards taking several steps away, and we wonder why we crave to be able to feel more sense of connection. And that's difficult, though, when we're always up in our head. And if I were to ask you, where do you feel that you most are in your body right now? If you were to point exactly where you feel the exact presence where you are mostly as your essence would be, most people in the Western world would point somewhere up here behind the eyes, between the ears. That wasn't always the case in other cultures. A lot of times they would point down into the chest. They feel that actually their center of sense of self was in their chest, some even as low as the belly. Most people would actually feel that they feel like there's this little person behind the eyes, between the ears, that's sort of running the show. It's pulling the little levers and watching, you know, through the eyes and hearing through the ears and running the thoughts and then making the commands to direct the rest of your body. And that is this, and the reason why we have that one is because of this sort of top dominant processing that dominates us, and the isolation and fragmentation from the rest of our body and the lack of embodiment. So on this slide, I want to kind of bring up one of the points of this body sensing. Why go to the body? Why try to sense and use the sensations as a tool to help you? Apologize for the slight typo over there, but it's supposed to be sensations. And one of the things is in the most interoceptive research that we've been looking at is that the sensations that we have are part, you're not feeling most of the things going on in your body. They only become more apparent when the intensity of those signals go up, either because maybe there's something, you know, kind of going awry and it wants you to pay attention to. But the vast part of the sensations are in the non-conscious realm over here. And then as the intensity rises, we become more aware of it. So for instance, most of us, only 10% of us can actually sense our heartbeat if we were to kind of just close our eyes and bring our attention, open up and sense. However, if I were to give you potentially like Adderall or some kind of powerful stimulant which makes your heart contract more, it raises the intensity of the signal, and you would be able to sort of sense and be able to pick up that your heartbeat at that level. So the sensations are some of them are non-conscious as they're in the weak signal, but as they gain their intensity, they go into more the conscious realm. So they are a bridge from the non-conscious to the conscious. And that's important because if we give our attention to our sensations and we learn to just kind of put our attention there, we're placing our attention at the interface between the conscious and the non-conscious mind. And why is this important? Is because these two forms of conscious, there is conscious and non-conscious thinking. And conscious thinking, they've studied this before, conscious thinking has a high limitation to it, because right now as you're looking at the screen that you're looking at and you're reading takes about, they estimate about 50 bits per second is about the processing speed when you're going and when you're reading material, as you probably are right now. Now, our ability to just non-consciously process our other senses at the same time is about 11 million bits per second. That's not counting all the other non-conscious processes that are going on. So it's about the non-conscious processing mind at this point, in the thinking mind, in that case alone is over 220 times faster than the processing speed of your conscious mind. Also, your conscious mind has the limitation of your working memory. That is basically the amount of kind of mental objects that you can hold in your mind, whether it's the verbal objects of the little voice in your head, but also if I were to ask you to multiply 12 times 11, you'd have to hold these sort of images of the 12 and 11 in your head and then try to keep track as you do the 12 and 12, and you sort of bring it down and you're changing the symbols, but and it's limited to how many symbols that you can hold at one time until basically you can't hold it anymore. And that's basically around 5 to 9 items. And so obviously some of the kind of working memory techniques that people do is try to chunk that information, but still you're limited to the 5 or 9 items. The non-conscious mind, on the other hand, the storage is actually unknown. It's so vast. So it's able to parallel process, doing multiple things at once, as opposed to the conscious mind, which is linear process. You can't hold 2 thoughts at the same time consciously. You can toggle back between them over and back and forth, or you can make an amalgam really quickly, but you can't actually hold 2 separate conscious cognitions at the same time. that's not true non-consciously. You're not limited by that. You can, in fact, the non-conscious mind very much acts like REM sleep in the capacity in which what it does with information. What it does is that instead of looking for the obvious connections, it purposely is biased to look for the non-obvious implicit connections between the different forms of information in your head. REM sleep does the same thing, and it's one of the reasons why it allows for much more insightful and creative, because you start making connections in ways that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise, just by sheer sort of following rules and linear-based thinking. So oftentimes when we're getting caught in chronic problems, whether it's anxiety or depression, just not feeling so well, and we're just getting into a rut, we can feel like we're feeling stuck. And if we get the feeling of hopelessness, for instance, hopelessness is never about you whenever you experience the feeling of hopelessness. Hopelessness is about what you are doing, and saying that what you are doing is hopeless, not that you yourself are hopeless. So hopelessness is showing some futility in what you're currently doing. So what we need to do is shake things up. We need to try new things and allow ourselves to be creative. Unfortunately, when many of us are in chronic straits of distress, anxiety, depression, we're pretty depleted, and our capacity for creative thinking goes down the tubes. So in order to allow ourselves to gain access to this other form of thinking and that creative capacity to think outside the box, to get you to look at the challenges you're facing in a brand new way, we need to be able to access this non-conscious processing. So the main message I want to bring here is your bodily sensations are a portal to your faster, global, and more creative and powerful non-conscious thinking mind. So I want you to get this concept can be a little bit tricky, but it's the current way we now view how we perceive and sense the world. So a pretty important model. It's called the prediction coding model. Basically, you don't see your computer screen right now as you're looking at it. Your mind anticipates based on past information, on past experiences and conditions, and also what its desired end state is. It anticipates what you're going to see, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're sensing, and it simulates it. Because in order to survive in this sort of fast environment, a simple sort of stimulus response is too slow. Anticipation and anticipating well is highly adaptive and gives you a supreme advantage over another creature that can't do that. And since we have this capacity, this wonderful brain that can do that, can project ourselves into the future fairly well, that's what our mind takes advantage of. It simulates it. Now, what happens is that you look at the predictions here, so these green here, so your brain sends out this prediction based on some of the kind of beginning information that it's receiving from the world and from inside. And then it receives all the world information, and what it does is it compares the two, the prediction versus the observed. And the difference is called the prediction error. Now, oftentimes our bodies, we have like what's called homeostasis. We want to be in certain comfortable ranges. And I'm just going to start with temperature. So let's say you were expecting in the current room that you're in that it's going to be somewhere between 72 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the prediction. And the observed slightly falls out of that, say 65 degrees Fahrenheit. So the prediction error in this case, I'll just take it from the bottom end, is 3 degrees Fahrenheit. So not a lot, but it's a little bit out, so you feel a little bit cool. Now, in the other example, you have 72 to 68, the observed becomes 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, this becomes a prediction error of 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And the idea here is the larger the prediction error, the higher the motivation to close the gap. And that motivation usually will come in the form of emotions. And the higher the prediction error, the more intense the motivation, which will then, and the more intense the emotions that are driving that emotion, give you the impulse to close the gap. Now, there's two ways to close the gap. One, and we're going to go into this in the next slides, I'd like you to try to remember this, is called active resolution. And it is as it sounds, like you actively try to change. So if you're in that room and you're at 65 degrees, you're like, no, I don't even want to sit, it's too cool. Let me just get a kind of a light kind of thing to throw over my my shoulders, and that way I can, and then puts myself back into sort of a more comfortable range. So you just quickly change the sensations in your body to match the prediction range that you want to be in. On the other hand, there's called perceptual resolution, where you would simply, in the 3 degrees, you just sort of open up and you just sort of sense, and you just allow yourself to feel that sort of coolness, but don't automatically just say, oh, it's unbearable, or it's uncomfortable. You're just noticing. And then over time, there's this capacity to habituate. And that means that over time, you're allowing your prediction range, instead of going from 72 to 68, to go to 72 to 65. It expands, it relaxes, it allows you to have the capacity to change the prediction range. And I think this will be the most complicated slide here. And so I want to just sort of spend a little bit of time on it. And hopefully if we ever need to go back to it, I'll go back to it. But so coming back to that active resolution versus perceptual resolution, it's an important distinction. So again, the goal of active resolution to close the prediction error gap between what you predict, your brain predicted, and what it actually felt, that prediction error. It wants to change the sensations to match the predictions, as opposed to the perceptual resolution, which wants to update the prediction ranges to match the sensations. So the problem with active resolution, this is where a lot of people come in, especially people with anxiety, is that immediately it's sort of knee-jerk. It's a reactive sort of problem solving. Like if you got into the situation where it's like 60 degrees and you wanted to be, between 68 and 72, you're like, oh, this is terrible. I need to figure out, why is it like this? Why is this person not keeping the temperature so well? You start going into like your mind, thinking a lot of thoughts, trying to problem solve. What can I do here? All the time you're missing out on all the other things that are going on in the room because you're actively trying to seek relief. And what happens is, because you're not paying attention to the aspects of your environment, and you're more up in your head trying to figure out how to make yourself feel more comfortable sensationally, you don't pay attention to your body that much anymore, and you're not paying attention to the perceptions, your external environment anymore. So you have more of your attention is sort of now taken up by thinking, and you get a sensory degradation. You don't then see or sense well. It actually goes down. And then we have a tendency to make kind of shit up, or confabulate, to put it in other terms, as to, if we don't have fill in the gaps, we're not getting the best information, we'll just sort of make things up, and we're more prone to illusions when that happens, and more prone to making mistakes about what's happening in our environment. Now juxtapose that to perceptual resolution, is where you're not going right into problem solving mode. You want to still get a sense of what is going on. Do I really need to go into an active resolution response, or is it possible I can just be with what is? And so it's more mindful, you're more exploring, you're more open, you're more understanding. Because you're sensing, you're giving your attentional bandwidth mostly to sensing itself, it strengthens your capacity to sense. It puts it into kind of like high definition mode. So you're able to better sense with greater precision and accuracy. And it allows for sort of more access to that non-conscious thinking processes for like global pattern recognition, which allows you to kind of see and get insights to things that you may not have had access to before. Going down the emphasis on active resolution is built around your prior cognitive models, your prior learning, your prior conditioning. And what happens, because you're up in the mind a lot, and then you're also getting only a little degraded sensory information, the dominance of the cognitive models interferes with sensory input, which generally lends itself to confusion. On the other hand, the emphasis on perceptual resolution is just getting to know the current perceptual landscape. You're really just the opening, allowing, sensing, noticing, and this allows for the possibility of new observations and insight and updates learning. You're not going in there and changing and trying to manipulate things first. You're first saying, hey, this situation, I don't know exactly what's going on. Let me actually put most of my capacity into sensing it, less into thinking about it, and get better at knowing what's going on first before I decide to act on it. So with the active resolution side, we're more cognitively reactive. We just want to get instant relief right now, right this second. And so we generally then allow ourselves to have just those reactive minds to a situation. If we have certain sort of uncomfortable sensations in the body that we might call anxiety, oh, I can't stand this is terrible, I got to do something about it. And then you're immediately trying to figure it out, why is this happening to me, what's going on, all these sort of talks. We get caught in these sort of cyclical type of thinking. If you're thinking about the past, it's mainly rumination. thinking about mainly about what if, about what happened in the future. We're mainly worrying, and rumination is one of the main cognitive features for depression, and worry is one of the main features, obviously, for anxiety disorders. As opposed to perceptual resolution, where because you're not putting as much of your attentional bandwidth on thinking, it lets thinking kind of be more open, more fluid. It allows itself, so you may have those initial reactive thoughts, but they're not held on to, they're just sort of let go of. So it allows then for not only those first kind of thoughts, those common, usual suspects that come up during a particular situation, but allows for secondary and tertiary thoughts to come up. This allows also your ability to what we call metacognize, meaning being able to look at your thoughts, this capacity to observe thinking by looking at your thoughts rather than from your thoughts. And that capacity to decenter, so then we have this more flexibility to choose, if we do need to go into thinking, to choose thinking, perhaps thoughts that we normally wouldn't choose, that are more insightful based on getting new observations and new sort of information by just getting more accurate sensing. So in the active resolution model, right here, going back down here, we're more cut off from our body, and it's more guided towards instant relief, so it's an avoidance response. And one thing, I just did an anxiety presentation, and one thing that connects all of the anxiety disorders, whether you have PTSD, whether you have social anxiety disorder, a specific phobia, panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, all of them have some different features, but the one thing that connects all the anxiety disorders is avoidance. All of them have avoidance in it. So active resolution is one of the ways, overuse of, in which we can develop and definitely influence our anxiety. As opposed to perceptual resolution is somatic integration. You're opening, you're sensing, you're allowing, you're bringing in the perceptual information and the sensory information. Those two are coming into more harmony with each other, and it's an approach response. And it allows us to get this felt sense of presence, a felt sense of connection to the world. Now it's not that the active resolution is wrong and the perceptual resolution is right. It's just that we tend to overemphasize active resolution into knee-jerk reactions to immediately change the sensations to match predictions. So the thing is that there's times to use active resolution and there's times to use perceptual resolution. And oftentimes though, for the chronic issues, we want to use, we need better intel if we keep falling into the same problems. So we use the perceptual resolution to get more of a sense of what's going on in the environment, not trying to change it and manipulate it. And then once we get a better sense, we can then switch over to active resolution with better information. So uncomfortable situations that tend to repeat themselves in your life are due in part by overuse of active resolution. When facing a problem that keeps repeating in your life, you need fresh, updated, accurate information and more creative thinking. Perceptual resolution, by sensing, listening, rather than thinking old worn-out thoughts, breathes new air into the pernicious problem. It gives you access to your powerful and creative non-conscious thinking programs. So this gives you a pictorial idea of the attentional bandwidth. Remember, when we went to the conscious thinking, it has limited capacity. Your attention, again, about 50 bits per second, maybe go up to as high as 100 bits per second. So if we're in active resolution, we're problem solving thinking, the vast majority is in the red thinking. So this, of course, leaves less of your attentional bandwidth to be dedicated to sensing and perceiving. And so this allows you to go, and that puts you into a low definition situation, and you're not getting good intel in that particular case. And you're more prone to somatic kind of issues. There is something called the rubber hand experiment, and I'm going to show you something. Maybe I'll show it to you later if we have a little bit more time, because I'm looking at the time, but where you're more prone to these sort of somatic illusions like the rubber hand experience when you're doing these sort of active resolution. But those who are more sensing oriented are less prone. If you do some sort of interoception practice prior to doing some of these classic somatic illusions, you're less likely to fall for them. And then, of course, in perceptual resolution, you're dedicating much more of your attentional bandwidth to sensing, which puts you kind of like in a high definition mode. Sensing becomes more accurate, precise. Your perceptions become more accurate and precise. And thus your thinking is just sort of like less, and it has less tendency to go into rumination and worry. So your attention is your conscious mind's most powerful tool. So one of the ideas that when you put your attention, whatever you put your attention on gains brain power. So learning to attend and listen to your body, you're giving it added brain power to help it come back into balance. So you're literally, when you're sensing your body, you're sensing a part of your brain called the somatosensory cortex. And by giving that your attention, you're enhancing your somatosensory cortex at the same time. It becomes a positive feedback loop, which then enhances its capacity to sense better. It's kind of a cool thing to do. And clinically, your attention is the main driver of habituation. So if you ever had to do some sort of exposure therapy, you have to be attentive in order for the exposure therapy to work. And so oftentimes being able to expose ourselves to what initially feels like very aversive sensations, whether from anxiety or depression, and by giving that your attention, eventually those can be habituated to. And then by giving your attention, it acts sort of like a solvent to a lot of the kind of subtle avoidances, the resistances. Like if I'm feeling sort of a tightness in my chest, and all of a sudden I don't want that tightness, I may also notice that there's not just a tightness in my chest, but if I sense that there's right around that tightness, there's another tightness. It's the fear of fear. It's the anxiety of anxiety. It's the resistance to what is already a resistance, and that kind of locks it in place. And one of the reasons why these emotions can become trapped in our body and kind of create a kind of like an emotional constipation effect. And what we want to be able to do is that attention, by giving it your attention, can oftentimes act, like I said, like a solvent, and gradually kind of, just unwind these resistances, which then allows to bring forth acceptance and allows the body to process, in this case, what I'm mentioning in the emotion. So I'm going to just do this quickly, but if you wake up feeling anxious, reactive, outdated versus metacognitive. So if you wake up and you feel constriction in your chest and belly and your breathing is slightly erratic, if you go right into sort of like your automatic sort of negative thinking, I'm feeling anxious again, what is wrong with me? Immediately, what's wrong? We're going down that hole. And immediately, why does this keep happening to me? Now, asking the question why when you're already feeling in the negative state is automatic. It's like you turned on in this case, the anxiety app in your brain, and you're asking why in a particular question. And the answer is, it's going to give you an answer that's based on fear and anxiety. That's just going to answer it in that way. So you're not getting great information when you ask these sort of questions. You're going to get things that are going to continue to amplify the negative feeling that you're experiencing. And then I can't stand this, you're going into sort of a judgment. I don't think I can go to work, and now you're imagining not being able to go to work. And again, it starts to snowball. So your active resolution, you're like, well, there's nothing I can do. I'm just going to take a medication. You just take your medication and you just continue to worry and ruminate. In the perceptual resolution, you could, instead of just immediately trying to problem solve and react and do something and change the sensations, just notice the sensations, directing your attention to what is uncomfortable. And oftentimes you have to be a little bit careful. Now, if anyone with a kind of a history of trauma, if any of this interoceptive work, I would suggest not jumping into it until you work with your therapist first, who can help to develop resource points. Because sometimes by giving your attention to these aversive sensations can amplify them. And if you're traumatized, it can amplify them to the point where it could be traumatic. So if you have any history of trauma, I highly recommend you don't jump into this kind of thing right off the bat, that you actually talk to your therapist and develop some sort of resourcing capacity before you do it. But anyway, getting back, so by directing your attention to what is, you're now observing your experience and not necessarily immediately jumping. And because now you're sensing, that opens up that sort of thinking, less is being dedicated, and allows it to kind of go into that more metacognitive, more sort of like flexible mode. And so you may have those first couple, thoughts like, I'm anxious and what's happened to me, but they're not held so tightly. And it allows now for secondary and tertiary thoughts to come up as you're just sensing and gaining better intel. And then your secondary thought might be, this has happened several times, and although not pleasant, usually resolves in an hour. And then, that's a more helpful thought. And then that might be the thought that you decide you ascribe to in that moment, rather than going into the other ones. Another one might be, walking in the past has been helpful. Let me get up and go for a walk. So as you've given some time to sense, it may then activate an active resolution response, but one that now is based on updated information and more likely to be helpful. So in essence, the perceptual resolution improves your metacognitive capacity and mental flexibility. So let's get into tuning into the interoception basics. So essentially, the sensations of our body, it's the primal language of our body. Our body obviously doesn't speak to us verbally, it speaks to us in the language of sensations. These are the body signals and feeling states that we feel. So our heartbeat is, if you can sense it sometimes, you can feel that, that's interoception, breathing, the sensation of the lungs. Like right now, just notice your breath, bring your attention in there, and just notice sort of the rubber expansion and contraction on your next breath or two. You feel that it kind of hits the rib walls and how the walls of the rib cage expands and contracts, and you get that sense. Again, that's your sixth sense. Hunger satiety would be another example, and then of course the common things like back and shoulder and jaw tightness. So you can just bring your attention into your back right now. Just notice your back muscles, whether up here or down here in the back area. Then you can notice your shoulders and traps. And then you can notice your jaw, both the upper and lower. And just a quick aside, what you can do is oftentimes, rather than trying to force things, but if you notice some tightness, one thing is that you can just sort of give an invitation to those areas that if they want to let go, they can. Because obviously you can't do that on purpose, but you can offer these sort of suggestions because the sensations works closer to the non-conscious realm, more to like akin to the kind of thinking that's involved in REM sleep. It's also more akin to sort of a priming and offering suggestions, oftentimes like in ways that you would see in sort of hypnosis. So you can give suggestions, you can give even like visualizations, like a knot untying in your mind if you're a visualizer, or a flower opening up, and then just let it go. Don't try to effort too much, but those subtle suggestions can have an impact oftentimes for people by doing that. The one thing is that once you sense your body, in order to sense your body, you have to go through your vagus nerve, which is your main nerve in your parasympathetic nervous system, which is of course the rest, digest, rejuvenation system. And so automatically when you're in distress, just by sensing, even though that might heighten the intensity of the sensation initially, you're now using your parasympathetic nervous system and improving its power when your sympathetic, your fight or flight is being activated. So you're starting to really help balance the system. One of the things you can just start with your hands, and it's one of the easier ones. I usually ask my clients, are you lefty or righty? And oftentimes most people are righty, and so I just say, all right, now just bring your attention into your right hand and just notice the sensations that are there. And although we're a little bit running out of time, but if you can just sense that for those who are able to know it, you might noticing like a tingling sensation or a buzzing sensation or a warmth or a coolness or a pulsating, those kind of qualities. And the areas where you can start off with, especially those of us who are not as sort of adept at sensing our body, is any body part, a little kind of rule of thumb, is any body part you wouldn't want a needle stuck in it. So your tongue, you can sense better. Your eyes, you can sense the eyes and the eyelids. The palms of your hands, you would want, it's easier to have it on the back of your hand, but your palms are easier to sense. Soles of your feet would be another one. These are the areas you can start with. You have to, if some people who have trouble sensing their body, what I always notice that there is a particular area where it's kind of like their portal into the sixth sense. They'll find some area and then we can work off of that. Once they get to know what it feels like, has that sort of vague kind of quality, an energetic-like quality, then we can be able to use that wedge to open it up and be able to sense further. So interesting, sixth sense and empathy, get better at relationships. So several studies have shown by simply dropping in your attention, and you can even do it right now if you wanted to, and just sense your heartbeat. And if you do that for 30 seconds and take a test that measures your ability to accurately guess, they show pictures of people with different emotions, your ability to accurately guess the emotions you see in the picture, it gets better. You score higher than if you didn't try to sense your heart. And interestingly enough, it doesn't matter whether you actually even feel your heartbeat, because only about 10% of people can accurately sense their heartbeat. It's just a matter of just tuning in that way allows you to be able to tune in to other people around you. And because when you're empathy, which is the ability obviously to sense what another person is experiencing, be able to accurately understand and sense the emotions they're having, it gives you helpful information on how to respond in your relationships, and you get more effective at just developing and sustaining interpersonal relationships. So some of the basic tips of interoception. Now, interoception is a sense, so it's not something you try. Oftentimes in my kind of my doers, my people who are very kind of go-getter types of high achievers struggle with this concept because they want to try to do it well and respond. But just think about like digestion or any of these other processes that are just sort of done by the nervous system. It's not like I'm going to ask you to eat your food and, all right, come on, digest better. Just come on, focus and make yourself digest. You know, by doing that, obviously, you give yourself most likely more indigestion than any other thing. And so the same thing is with sensing. It's already happening. Your body's sensing. It's whether you're tuning into it or not. So oftentimes, you know, when you're sensing, it's receiving. It's coming to you. So you're not going after anything like that. So again, the idea is called the law of least effort. There's going to be a little bit of effort that you're going to be using, but uses the least amount necessary. The idea is to simply open, receive, tune in, allow, and sometimes even using those words in your mind can be helpful reminders so that you don't go out there and try and perform and do all those kind of other things that you would do in any other kind of skill set. So just to use those as a reminder. Now, if you are trying, there are two feedback mechanisms. I didn't include this, but I wanted to kind of highlight that. That will tell you when you're trying too much. And one is frustration. You'll notice that you're just getting frustrated and you're like, all right, well, then you're obviously trying to do something because you can't do sensing. And then the other thing is like you'll get a thought in your head that like, this isn't working, or this isn't, you know, I'm not doing this right, or this isn't working. And then that will tip you off that, oh, I'm trying to do this. And so those are great. When you hear any of those two or experience those, then know that you're trying to do, and then remind yourself to open, receive, and tune in. Two aspects, the intentional anchoring, being able to bring your attention instead of it jumping off and hanging out with all the verbal noise, which is happening to most of us right now, even right now, because obviously you have to listen to my verbal noise right now and the verbal noise in your head that's going simultaneously, and learning how to toggle between the two. But actually bringing your attention to the nonverbal aspects of our experience. And when it does get caught up in the verbal noise, which of course it's going to do that, so you know, nothing to get upset about. It's a habit that's been going on for most of your life. Is that you just, when you notice it, you gently boomerang it back. It's not, again, it's law of least effort, so it's more guiding. It's more like judo rather than direct on, head-on collisions. The other thing you can do is you can use your hands to help soothe and act like a homing device. So if we're going to bring our attention down into our chest, or you can sort of just bring your attention here and just sort of bring it into your hand and then put it into the chest itself. Bring it underneath the chest right now if you want to try to experiment with this. And then if we were to bring it down into your belly, you could take your other hand and put it right underneath and right by your belly button, and then just let the attention sort of go behind the hand into the chest, and then let it sort of fall down into the solar plexus and then into the belly, and just sort of let it sustain there. And what you can do is, rather than trying to concentrate, if you're just keeping it behind the belly button, letting it sustain there, it's just let it open up and let it just notice what's there, receiving and sensing, just letting it do what it naturally wants to do. And that is just sense, noticing what the body feels like. And so we're not like forcing and we're not concentrating, we're just opening, allowing, and sensing. And it allows it to kind of get anchored in with the sensations. Now, for people who have trouble body sensing, we do what anyone, when you ever have trouble picking up something, is that we just intensify the signal. So one of the things is you can clap. So what I'm going to do is, hopefully this is not too loud, but I'll tell the person to clap 10 times with their hands, and you can do that with me right now if you want, just 10 times. And then just hold your hands out and close your eyes and sense your hands. And you'll notice obviously the tingling sensation. And you just sort of let the person sort of track the sensations, and you notice it getting lighter and lighter and lighter. And then some people will eventually then be able to just sense at that point, but you may need to do that a few times to kind of warm the person up. And you could do other body parts as well. Other things you could do is, I have people sometimes hold something heavy in their arm and let them sense as the arm muscles start to burn, as the lactic acid builds up, and they're feeling this sort of the pH drop. They can feel the kind of burn in there, and that's obviously a sixth sense. And then when they do, they can let it go and just sense the release of that, the relief qualities, the kind of waves of what's going on in the body, and then that will help sort of tune them in. Once they get a sense of it, you know, they'll be able to pick up with it, but you may have to use these intensification methods first. Another thing you could do is actually using like peppermint. You can use peppermint oil and just use that to sense the lungs as they go in and out, or just put like a good, like, you know, like an Altoid or something like that in your mouth. But the first goal is to be able to improve attentional control. And doing it in the way that we were just talking about, by anchoring, by giving the attention an alternative. Because those of us who think a lot, like I have an obsessive mind, and a lot of my clients have obsessive thinking. So I found that using the substitution effect, by using the sensations, which are kind of more like icebergs, they move much slower than, say, our thoughts, which is more like a whirlwind. They go, it's very fast. So we allow the sensations to kind of be an anchor for the attention, and then we can sort of let it rest there. And what I generally do is, in order to make it more pleasant, is what you can do is right now, and we can just do this really quickly, it's just bring your attention inside your body, wherever it wants to go inside your body. And then let's play a game where let your attention explore your body and find where you feel most comfortable. And then wherever you might feel what's most comfortable, just let your attention rest there and hang out with it. And if any time the attention goes chasing after any thought stream, you just notice it and gently boomerang it back. Coming back to this most comfortable spot that you feel in your body, and just let your attention be soothed by that comfortable spot. And this most comfortable spot is a great way to introduce, because oftentimes we don't want to make things, we want to make it a little easier, more attractive when you're starting new skills. And also this comfortable spot can become like a resource point. So one of the techniques that can be done for people for learning how to regulate their emotions is that these sensations might be so intense that what we need to do is we actually can't put the attention directly on it. It amplifies it too much. So what we need to do is bring the attention to the comfortable spot of their body, and then slowly introduce it into the more intense, aversive sensations, but stay outside of it until they get used to it a little bit better. And then anytime it gets too intense, they pendulate back into the comfortable spot. And then we can kind of bring them back and forth. And I call it pendulate to regulate. So you just go back and forth, and so they're learning in that whole moment. It's not just being able to expose themselves, but they're also getting better attuned to their body and how to respond to it with greater wisdom. Again, tracking we would do is, if you were sensing your hands right now, you can move up your arms to your wrists, forearms, elbows, upper arms. You can just let your attention sort of flow up there. And again, it helps with just exploring when we're trying to explore a particular sensation. The pendulating aspect, which I just spoke about, helps you to regulate, going back and forth between a resource spot, a place that's comfortable, and then going into the more uncomfortable areas and allowing yourself to gain sort of a more empowerment to be able to explore, and more courage after getting refueled at sort of the spot that was more comfortable for you. And then the other aspect then is unhooking, which is the capacities that when you get caught on a particular thought stream, this is really important for OCD kind of symptoms, is how to be able to disengage your attention, to unhook it and redirect it somewhere else. And that one's one of the most difficult, because one of the things we see in chronic anxiety is what we call delayed disengagement. It's one of the most prominent and destructive patterns that we see with anxiety, chronic levels of anxiety, is the less and less capacity to disengage from unhelpful negative cognitions. And so this capacity, by giving attention, I found to be the most effective way to do that. It still requires a lot of time to get over, especially if your obsessive compulsive condition is very strong. But over time, it will actually work when done consistently. So there's a bunch of different exercises and games you can do. I like to kind of get people playing with it, but like you can do, first you just sort of can go down your body, what parts of my body feel warm? And you just go from your head down to your toes and just call them out loud. And then you can do its opposite, cool. And then you can do tight and loose and all those other ones. There are certain parts of the body that are easier to anchor if you're practicing anchoring, like in your hands or your feet, or your belly button, base of your spine, those kind of things, your buttocks where you're sitting down, which actually feels like an anchor, those kind of things. And again, going back to if the person can't sense it, just pump up the signal, intensification, tapping, using weights. You can even do like games where you drink like warm tea and you swallow and see how far you can sense. So you can just swallow. This is not obviously warm, but if it was, you just swallow it and then see how far you can trace it down as you're sensing it. Again, you can have fun with this. And then the attentional control skills, being able to switch back and forth. You can sense your left hand, right hand, then sense both, left, right, both, then feet. You can kind of play a little game with yourself when you're watching TV, tracking up and down. You can, again, either you're doing it fluidly, like if you're going from your arm and then you're sensing back up to your wrist, up to your forearm, and all the way up to your shoulder. You can just let it kind of go up in that way, or you can kind of hopscotch. So you can kind of go from your wrist to your elbow to your shoulder and just be able to jump around, and you're just developing these other capacities. One of the trickier ones, but it can be extremely powerful, is splitting your attention. So oftentimes when I'm working with clients, I want to enhance that when we're talking about when you sense, your capacity for empathy increases. So I want my empathy to be at its optimum when I'm working with my clients. So this dual attention where I drop some of my attention in my belly, and I'm also then directing my attention to my perceptual listening and all those other aspects of my experience. But by doing that, and eventually it requires like that least amount of effort, and eventually it becomes like riding a bike. And so then that's open to you, and then you're better able to empathize, and it's really, really important. And then we're talking about, of course, like tapping and contracting, releasing other ways. Like in progressive relaxation, you contract the muscle for 3 seconds and then you let go, and that release, and that's another way you can intensify and be able to feel the sensations. So engaging with your prior emotion play is one of the things I try to induce with a lot of my clients. It is one of the best ways to learn new skills. It's much easier to learn when you're curious, having fun, and interested. And I call it developing your somatic spidey sense. And that playfulness is really helpful. I mean, it's kind of cool, actually. Once you start to really tune into these sensations, it has that sort of energetic quality. You can feel the inner aliveness in that kind of thing, and it's really kind of interesting. And you want to kind of engender that. It just makes it a lot easier, and it pays off in many different ways. One of the main areas that like first things I go with a lot of my clients, I'll send them my Going Elemental sheet and my Bottomup processing sheets. In the Going Elemental, what we're doing here is we're using scientific descriptors to help detach from old interpretation, judgments, and predictions. So instead of saying like you're having anxiety, you actually want to go a little bit more closer to the experience of what you're actually experiencing. So what's that? Let's pierce through that anxiety. Describe it like a scientist. What are you describing sensationally? And you're like, well, I have tightness in my chest. I feel kind of a fluttering sensation in my belly. And so instead of then the old cognitions, those reactive ones that come out like, oh my God, this is anxiety. I can't handle this. This is terrible. Well, why is this happening to me? These interpretations and judgments. And each time you go through that, you're practicing those. It's another repetition that's searing these ideas into your head so that they're more likely to show up the next time around. And it's one of the reasons why anxiety disorders or chronic disorders in general, they have these positive feedback loops that make them hard to treat. So this is one of the ways to cut the cords onto that kind of maladaptive practicing. So you use these scientific descriptors instead, that it's tight, loose, being more precise with your language. And you can remember the SLIM acronym. So the sensations like tingling, buzzing, warm, tight, those things, you localize it, the outlining, the boundaries, the depth, the intensity level from 0 to 10, and then of course also the movements like sinking and rising, expanding, and whatnot. So when you name it the team, and so when you go Going Elemental, it helps describe the sensations accurately. When you label a sensation accurately, it calms down the part of your brain that's your threat detection center, your amygdala. So by you label it accurately, it immediately calms down the amygdala, which is one of the organs that sends forth, one of the areas of the brain, the stress response system, your kind of fight or flight response, so that can calm that down just by naming things accurately. And by using these precise terms, you're substituting that reactive noise from outdated interpretations, like I'm having a heart attack, or judgments, I can't stand this, or predictions, I'm never going to get better. and uses simple and precise descriptions of what is. And that's the thing, is you're describing what is present right now, not any imaginations of it. We're preferentially teaching the attention to stay with concrete experience, not with going into conceptions. Then we have bottom-up processing, and it's bridging the nonverbal to verbal gap. And that's one of the big areas that here is to try to help with that. So the power of inquiry, and that is using questions not to generate an analytical response, but to be able to use a question to direct your attention better to an aspect of your experience that you're exploring. So the first thing you want to do is called hot spotting, which is like if you have a sensation you want to explore in this way, is where is that hot sensation? Where is that sensation that, you know, and hot not necessarily in temperature, but prominent. And then you anchor your attention there. So now you're setting up a connection between your brain mind and the sensations itself. And then you can start dropping in these questions, like if these sensations had a voice, what would it say? And you drop it, but you don't analyze it. It's like you're dropping a little bit of a fishing hook inside the sensations, which is directly connected to the non-conscious thinking, and you see if anything bites. If an image might arise, a memory might come up, a verbal thought might come up, or nothing, and you might just process there. But it's just sort of dropping the question and just noticing what happens. And then there are other questions you can kind of go into, like what does it want or need? What actions does it take? The idea is just to sense, explore, and listen. So bottom-up processing trains you to listen to your body and how to use its language of sensations to gain access to the non-conscious thinking mind by using the power of inquiry. It balances the general tendency to overemphasize top-down analysis. So this idea of the sensational navigation system, and it's basically learning to use your sixth sense to help guide your thoughts and your actions. And so there's two types of really main signals: your resonance signals, which offer like the aha, the insight and clarity. And oftentimes you'll feel that. You can sense it in your body when things are just sort of like, you can feel a rightness. It opens up a little. There's an expansion. You feel a little bit lighter, loosened. Energetically, you may feel tingling or goosebumps. You may feel like a healthy kind of groundedness. Your perception might shift. You might see things all of a sudden seem brighter and clearer and closer. And the closest way our body can speak to us verbally are what are called interjections. So we'll see like ah, or aha, or ha, or oh, like that with the upward inflection, or wow, or yeah. These are listen to those. When that happens, pay attention, stop. Your body's telling you some deep truth in that moment. And then of course you have the dissonance signals, which are the signals for confusion and conflict, the kind of the inner no, and that is like a tightness, constriction, feel heavier, things feel dull or numbness, you feel a little bit ungrounded. Your perceptual things start to seem dimmer or cloudy and foggy, or they may seem chaotic or all of a sudden like very overwhelming and large and imposing, other times more distant. And then your interjections might be like you know, these sort of downward inflection kind of things that will signify obviously something is confused, something's in conflict in that moment. And you can use that subtle, as you get more and more precise and accurate at utilizing your sixth sense, you can use that in many different ways. Even things like picking up foods after a while, you can get a sense of what foods would be your body wants better after a while. They can go to that level. And then the final thing I want to mention is called the primal sense, or the being motor presence. And basically that is just allowing things, a person put it really sweetly, and like it's the experiment of learning the art of doing nothing. Since we're so wrapped up in doing, it's kind of spastic. It's almost, it just happens automatically at this point. It's like a muscle spasm. So it does take actually some practice for a lot of us to just decondition this compulsive need to do and just receive your experience. And even for right now, just allow yourself, rather than trying to listen to me and try to do something with it, just let yourself sort of receive what you're seeing and receive the sounds that are coming to you without trying to do anything with them. And just allow yourself to shift into receiving your experiencing. And even that, for some people, might notice that it has a subtle change in the way your body feels in that particular moment. And allows, when you're not trying to manipulate your experience and changing it, you're not adding in extra noise, you're able to see things more clearly. And this helps you by seeing things more clearly. You get better information, allows you to tune up and recalibrate your sensing capacity and distinguish between what we call noise, things that are not helpful, to signal, which are the things you want to be able to pay attention to that will help you to kind of make wiser decisions in your life. So I wanted to bring you to a conclusion today, and it's the sixth sense body wisdom conclusion. And your bodily sensations, they are the portal to your powerful, non-conscious, creative, powerful, fast thinking. And your interoceptive sense automatically empowers your soothing and restoration system. By sensing, you're automatically empowering your parasympathetic nervous system through the vagus nerves. That's how you sense. Sensing increases precision and accuracy of your direct experience. It gives you new information and intel for insight and understanding into problems that tend to happen kind of repetitively in your life. Sensing reduces reactivity and increases cognitive flexibility because you're not putting all this, it's not taking up all this sort of rumination and worry. It's allowing yourself to bring in the new information. And again, you're entering into that REM sleep kind of mode where it's taking one piece of information and purposely looking for these sort of not as obvious connections, these implicit connections that are super helpful for coming up with insights. And then there's the going elemental, which we use the scientific descriptors to be able to undercut, like going underneath by using words that primarily describe your direct experience, undercutting the more conceptual, abstract judgments, interpretations, and reactive cognitions that are actually more causing the suffering. And that will, by doing so, by giving more attention to these primary descriptors, you are weakening the old conditioning. Then the bottom-up processing, which bridges the nonverbal sensations into the verbal, and then the sensational navigation system is what you would use to help you to kind of navigate the space between resonance and dissonance, the yes and no of this nonverbal intelligence. And finally, the primal sense, the non-doing, which helps you to kind of removes the noise from your perceptions and your sensations and being able to really see for clearly what's going on, and allows for clear seeing and more wisdom to be gathered from your experiences because you're not actively doing something to derange it or manipulate it in any way. So at that, I will conclude and be open to any questions from anybody.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mantz. We're getting great response, and I want to remind everyone that this will be available in about 2 weeks on the website. The first question that we had way back earlier in your presentation was from a clinician. It's kind of 2 parts. It said, please explain more about disembodiment and the context within your reference to it was. And then the next question from the same person was, is somatic disassociation the same as disembodiment?
Yeah, I think when we go into the point of somatic dissociation, we use that term, and clinically, I think we're talking about maybe a more intensified version of this sort of this disembodiment. I think a lot of us are disembodied. I think most, it might be fair to say, are disembodied to some extent. It's a matter of degree. At the point where we're just paying much more attention to the verbal aspects of our experience dominantly, so as opposed to the nonverbal aspects of our experience and nonverbal kind of messages and signals we're getting, it leads itself to this sort of feeling like we're just this sort of kind of top heavy. We're up in our head and sort of divorced from our bodies. Now, when we get more into like a dissociation experience, we're going into a much more deeply divided, fractionated body, where oftentimes we would be associated with things like trauma, where you really start to feel a higher, heightened sense of this disembodiment and dissociation from the body, and also oftentimes from the world. So dissociation from the body being depersonalization, and from the world being derealization are the technical terms for that. But that's where coming back into, by actually sensing the body. Again, in trauma, we would want to learn to resource, whether it's coming up like an imaginary inner resource that a person can give their attention to kind of give it a safe space, or a body resource, like the more comfortable spot where it can go to as a place of refuge, and then go slowly, very slowly, to the areas where there might be discomfort so we can pendulate to regulate to be able to regain that part back in. And that would be sort of like, there's these sort of disavowed parts that are then brought back and integrated back together, and then we become embodied in that particular moment. We're using both our cognitions and our sensations and the perceptions, you know, in a more balanced way.
Great, thank you. And she confirmed you definitely answered her question, so thank you so much. The next therapist has a specific question about a mom that she sees who is certain that her son has pathological demand avoidance with a primary diagnosis of autism, and she's wondering about your thoughts on this and how it relates to body sense.
So can you repeat that first part again, if you don't mind, Carol?
Sure.
I didn't hear that first.
And I asked her more specifically, she wants to know, oh, so the child has a diagnosis of autism, and the mom is sure that he has pathological demand avoidance. And the clinician is asking how it relates to body sense and noting that the child doesn't feel comfortable in his body, and perhaps it adds to his refusing to do school tasks or be in different places in school.
Yeah, interesting. So, I mean, I'm not an autistic expert, but I did happen to work in my third year residential clinic with an autism clinic. So I did have a lot of firsthand experience during my residency training. And then I, you know, obviously have had some autistic clients in my work. And oftentimes in autism, there is an issue with sensory integration. So it's where, and that's why they can become so overwhelmed by different sensations where like the lights can be very bright and it can kind of really be upsetting. So it really is, you know, an aspect of being able to, how to integrate the different sensations. So I have been starting to work with, I don't have a lot of clients with autism, but I do have a couple, and I have been using slowly, because again, it's kind of like a new territory I wanted to say, but these techniques in that situation, and again, where it was really important was to really frame it underneath, like we're having a game, we're going to try this new, and finding out what they like, whether a lot of times in the case, it could be like a comic book character or something, and pretending like you're developing these special powers, but framing it in that way. So that can help the person be able to slowly just learn to bring their attention from one thing to the next and not get flooded like that often happens in autism, is that flooding, because then it gets hard to, like you're saying with the demand issue, is like, there's an easy tendency to become overwhelmed. So in those instances, we would want to work on resourcing by being able to see how much the attention has been affected, because oftentimes autism comes paired with OCD. So that's a little trickier in that area, because now there's a lot of thinking, a lot of background thoughts. So again, it depends on each case what you would want to do, but ultimately I found that by doing some of this body sensing, by getting people to become more grounded, resource points, getting a little bit more attentional control, you'll have to modify how much you would do that based on a case-by-case basis, but it does allow for greater sensory integration over time. It's slower generally, and the biggest challenge in that case is generally there's oftentimes in autism low frustration tolerance. So that's why the playful aspect, the rewarding aspect, that has to be emphasized when doing this kind of work.
Excellent, thank you.
Sure.
I know I'm gonna look back at this because I was busy with questions during it and I feel like I wasn't fully present, so I want to thank you. You have a lot of excellent comments and compliments, so thank you so much. I'm gonna mute myself and turn down my camera. Cynthia, are you ready to come in?
Thanks, Carol.
Yes, I am, and thank you. I just want to thank all of you for attending. This was a wonderful presentation, Dr. Mantz. I'm glad we were able to schedule the part 2 with a little gap in between from the part 1, but it's relevant to all of our practices as mental health professionals and personally as well. And I thought it was just reinforcing everything from the previous talk that you did. So I do appreciate that. Thank you so very, very much.
You're welcome.
anybody has any questions, would you want them just to send it to me, or would you want them to correspond with you directly?
He's put his website up, Cynthia.
Okay.
So
there it is.
definitely please check that.
Yeah, on the website there's a Dr. Mantz email that you can send to, that goes to my admin advisor. So if you had that, or they can go through, I mean, I don't know if you mind Cynthia at all too, if they went through you or whatever, they can go through either venue. There's also the Mind Health IQ, which is just a free newsletter for people, so that people want who, not able obviously to see me or Dr. Lay, and they want more kind of integrated mind health information. Basically it's just once a month you get like an article or a video that gives some more helpful free information to kind of boost your mind health and just make you more empowered overall.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And just as a reminder, May 25th is the next Psych Grand Rounds with Dr. Eric Nelson here to present. And this is being recorded and will be posted on the Cottage webpage in approximately 2 weeks. So thank you all for coming. Have a fabulous afternoon. Thank you for supporting Psychiatric Grand Rounds.
Thank you, everybody.
And thank you, Dr. Mantz.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Cynthia and Carol. I appreciate your help on organizing this all together. So thanks again.
We really appreciate you and your patience.
Yes.
You've done a great job. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right. Have a great afternoon, everyone.